It was a cold, quiet evening in a high-crime neighborhood, where danger lurked behind every shadow. The dim, flickering streetlights offered little comfort, casting uneven pools of light along the deserted streets. Maya, a 30-year-old compliance officer, walked briskly home after an exhausting day at work. Her sharp black jacket, dark jeans, and sturdy boots shielded her from the biting chill, but her tired eyes betrayed the weight of a long and relentless day. With every step, the rhythmic sound of her boots echoed through the empty street, a fleeting sense of peace amidst the chaos of the city. But peace was a luxury Maya rarely enjoyed in a world like this, and tonight was no exception. Out of nowhere, the growl of an engine shattered the silence. A patrol car screeched to a stop, blocking Maya's path. Startled, she froze as two officers, Stevens and Grant, stepped out with cold, unyielding expressions. Their reputation preceded them, officers notorious in the community for their aggressive behavior and misuse of authority. "You deliberately drove in the bus lane," Officer Stevens barked, his voice dripping with disdain. Maya's brow furrowed in confusion. "I was walking, not driving," she said, her voice calm but firm. Before she could utter another word, Officer Grant stepped forward, his tone sharp and commanding. "Don't argue," he snapped. "We're giving you a ticket for disobeying traffic laws." Maya stared at them in disbelief, her mind racing to process the absurd accusation. It didn't make sense. She tried to reason with them, to explain the impossibility of their claim, but the situation spiraled further out of control. Stevens suddenly leaned in, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air theatrically. "I smell narcotics," he declared, his voice laced with accusation. Without waiting for consent, he grabbed Maya's bag and began rummaging through it. "Hey, you can't do that," Maya protested, her voice rising with frustration, but her words fell on deaf ears. The officers ignored her, their search invasive and unwarranted. Despite finding nothing, they exchanged knowing glances and smirks. "You're carrying illegal substances," Grant stated flatly, as if it were a fact. "This is ridiculous," Maya said, her voice tinged with incredulity. "I want to call my lawyer." Grant's eyes narrowed, and a chilling smirk spread across his face. "Call whoever you want, but we'll make sure this case sticks," he sneered. Maya's world spun as the weight of their corruption settled over her. Fueled by prejudice and their own unchecked authority, Stevens and Grant cuffed her and placed her under arrest. The charge? Drug possession and resisting arrest, both blatant fabrications. As they shoved her into the patrol car, Maya clenched her fists, her mind reeling. She knew the stakes were high. For someone like her, a black woman navigating a flawed system, the odds were stacked against her. But beneath her composed exterior, a storm brewed. She wasn't about to let this injustice define her. The next morning, Maya found herself standing in a cold, stark courtroom. The air was heavy with tension, the echo of the gavel striking the bench still lingering in the room. The charges read against her felt surreal, their weight pressing heavily on her shoulders. Yet, despite the grim circumstances, Maya's expression remained calm and unwavering. In the gallery, the two officers sat confidently, their smug expressions radiating arrogance. They were certain their fabricated reports would seal Maya's fate. After all, they had done this before. But what they didn't know was that Maya wasn't just any defendant. Hidden behind her poised demeanor was a truth that would shatter their confidence. Maya wasn't only a compliance officer. She was a federal inspector tasked with uncovering corruption within law enforcement. For years, she had worked silently to expose systemic abuse, her identity carefully guarded. But now, it was time for her to reveal who she truly was. As the judge began to read the charges, the heavy doors of the courtroom swung open with a dramatic creak. The room turned as a tall, commanding figure strode in. Evelyn Price, a federal prosecutor and a trusted ally of Maya, exuded authority with every step. Her presence alone was enough to shift the atmosphere. "Your Honor," Evelyn said, her voice steady and resolute, "before proceeding, I'd like to introduce critical evidence that sheds light on the integrity of this case." The courtroom buzzed with curiosity as Evelyn presented her findings. Surveillance footage, damning emails, and sworn testimonies began to unravel the narrative crafted by Stevens and Grant. Each piece of evidence painted a clear picture of systemic corruption and prejudice. The officers' smirks faded, replaced by uneasy glances as their fabricated story crumbled before them. Maya's attorney, David, seized the moment. A young and fiery lawyer, he dismantled the officers' testimonies with precision, highlighting contradictions and blatant violations of Maya's rights. His arguments were sharp, his voice unwavering as he chipped away at their lies. The officers, once brimming with confidence, now appeared visibly rattled. Beads of sweat formed on their brows as they exchanged nervous whispers. For the first time, they realized they were up against someone far more formidable than they had anticipated. Maya herself stepped forward to testify, her voice steady and filled with quiet strength. "I am not just any woman," she began, her gaze unwavering as she locked eyes with the judge and jury. "I work with federal agencies to uncover corruption within law enforcement. I've seen cases like this fabricated time and time again." Her words reverberated through the courtroom, their weight palpable. The tension in the room was thick as the gravity of her revelation settled over everyone present. Evelyn continued to press forward, presenting more evidence that exposed the depth of the officers' corruption. Every detail further unraveled their lies, leaving them with no room to escape. The courtroom grew still, the officers now pale and silent as the reality of their situation sank in. The tide had turned, but the battle was far from over. The trial entered its final phase, and the courtroom was thick with tension. Stevens and Grant, once smug and overconfident, now sat slouched in their seats, their faces pale and expressions grim. The truth of their corruption was no longer a secret. The walls they had built around their lies were crumbling brick by brick. The atmosphere was electric as Evelyn Price, the federal prosecutor, delivered the final pieces of evidence with unrelenting precision. Evelyn presented damning surveillance footage, showing the officers' unwarranted search of Maya's belongings. The grainy video was undeniable proof of their abuse of power. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Evelyn said, her voice firm yet measured, "these actions are not just violations of protocol. They are deliberate acts of prejudice and corruption, aimed at someone they believed would have no means to fight back. But they underestimated Maya." David, Maya's attorney, built on Evelyn's momentum. His voice was clear and commanding, his arguments precise. "The defendants fabricated evidence and abused their positions to frame an innocent woman," he said, pointing toward Stevens and Grant. "Their lies weren't just an attack on Maya. They're an attack on the very justice system they swore to uphold." The jury listened intently, their focus unwavering. Maya sat silently at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly. She exuded a quiet strength, her calm demeanor masking the storm of emotions within. Her case was no longer just about her innocence. It was about exposing a system that had enabled individuals like Stevens and Grant to operate unchecked for far too long. When it was Maya's turn to testify, she stood with a quiet grace that commanded attention. She walked to the witness stand, her steps steady despite the weight of the moment. As she began to speak, the room fell silent. "I have spent my career fighting against corruption within law enforcement," Maya said, her voice calm but laced with conviction. "I've seen cases like mine fabricated time and time again. I've witnessed the destruction these lies cause, not just to individuals, but to families and communities." Her gaze swept across the room, locking eyes with the jury members. "But today, I stand here not just as a victim of injustice, but as someone determined to hold those responsible accountable. Stevens and Grant thought they could silence me, but they were wrong." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Even the judge, who had maintained a neutral expression throughout the trial, seemed moved by her testimony. As Evelyn introduced more evidence, the courtroom became a stage for the unraveling of Stevens and Grant's deceit. Witnesses from the neighborhood, emboldened by Maya's courage, stepped forward to testify. They shared their own experiences of harassment and misconduct at the hands of the two officers, painting a damning picture of a pattern of abuse. The officers, once bold and unrepentant, now looked like shadows of their former selves. Stevens' hands fidgeted nervously, while Grant avoided eye contact with everyone in the room. Their defense attorney, who had initially tried to downplay their actions, now struggled to mount any credible counterarguments. By the time the closing arguments were made, the jury had heard an overwhelming amount of evidence. David's final words were a powerful reminder of what was at stake. "This case isn't just about Maya," he said, his voice resonating with emotion. "It's about every individual who has been wrongfully targeted. It's about standing up against corruption and ensuring that justice prevails." The jury deliberated for hours, but to Maya, it felt like an eternity. She sat quietly at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly together. Her heart raced, not just for herself, but for the countless others who had faced similar injustices. She knew the verdict would have far-reaching implications. Finally, the jury returned. The room fell into an uneasy silence as the foreman stood to deliver the verdict. "Guilty on all counts," the foreman declared. The words echoed through the courtroom, a seismic shift that left everyone momentarily stunned. Relief washed over Maya as she exhaled deeply, her composure momentarily breaking. She glanced at Evelyn and David, who both gave her reassuring nods. The judge turned to Stevens and Grant, his expression severe. "Your actions not only violated the law but betrayed the trust placed in you as officers of the law. You will face criminal charges and the full weight of justice." The officers sat motionless, their faces pale and defeated. The arrogance they had worn so openly was gone, replaced by the reality of their downfall. As Maya left the courthouse, the crowd outside erupted in applause and cheers. Her family, friends, and supporters surrounded her, their faces beaming with pride. Reporters pushed forward, cameras flashing as microphones were thrust toward her. Maya raised her hand, signaling for quiet. Her voice, calm yet commanding, carried over the noise. "This victory isn't just mine," she said. "It's for every person who has been wrongfully accused, for every Black person who has faced systemic injustice. This fight isn't over. We must continue to push for a future where justice is truly blind." Her words resonated far beyond the courthouse steps. Social media lit up with the hashtag Justice for Maya, sparking widespread conversations about systemic corruption and reform. Maya's victory became a symbol of resilience and the power of truth. Stevens and Grant, once so confident in their impunity, now faced disgrace and criminal charges. Their careers were over, and their actions would forever be a stain on their records. For Maya, the battle was a turning point. She had not only cleared her name, but it also exposed a broken system that desperately needed change. As she walked away from the courthouse, surrounded by her loved ones, she knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but she was ready. Maya's fight became a beacon of hope for others, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage and perseverance could prevail. And as the world watched her rise from the ashes of injustice, one thing became clear. The power of truth could not be silenced.